And we welcome Jared and Jacob from Marble City Pharmacy Help Monday for this Monday morning. And gentlemen, you got the red eye flight coming back to Sylacauga from the Super Bowl.
That was a barn burner.
I tell you. And I guess y'all flew back on what's her name's plane, right?
I actually piloted it. Yeah.
He's a Swiftie.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you both for coming this morning. It's always a pleasure to have you. And today, we're talking about pressure ulcers. And, this affects, just in my mind's eye, people who are maybe hospitalized or incapacitated or something like that. But a little bit the description of pressure ulcers.
Well, it does affect those people, and some others we'll talk about in just a second. But you know what pressure ulcers are, and we know what pressure ulcers are. But let's make sure we know what we're talking about. Sometimes they're called decubitus ulcers. You probably don't know that term. That's probably the technical term. The slang term for pressure ulcers, though, are bed sores, and that's accurate and not accurate. It does happen a lot of times with people who are lying in bed, which we'll talk about in just a second, but it doesn't have to be somebody who's confined to the bed. So bed sores is a slang term. Pressure ulcers are probably a little bit better because, again, can happen to people who are not just in the bed.
Now, does it happen to any particular age group or more susceptible to this, Jake?
Yes. Just by virtue of how they happen, it's more common in older than younger for a number of reasons. But like I said, it's not just wheelchair-bound people. It's not even bed-bound people only. It's people whose health and lifestyle status is such that their day pretty much consists of, I get up in the morning, make my way with my walker or cane or whatever to my recliner. We all got our chair, right? To my chair. And that's what I do for the day.
Nobody else better sit in my chair.
Right. And that's my day. And then when it gets dark, I reverse the same process and go back to bed. And so these prolonged periods of being down like that, bed, wheelchair, recliner, sofa, whatever the case may be, all day, every day, increased age, decreased nutrition status, decreased hydration, all these things go into who gets them. But it's mostly people who are physically down.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about what causes the pressure ulcers or bed sores. Jared, talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, there's a difference between who gets them and what causes them. So we'll separate that out just a little bit. They're called pressure ulcers for a reason. So the number one cause of something like this would be pressure to certain areas of the skin. When you put that pressure on a certain area of the skin, it limits the blood flow. Your blood flow is important. You guys know this, but your blood flow is important because it gets oxygen to the tissues, right? The blood flow also brings certain nutrients to the tissues that keep them healthy. And so when you cut off that blood flow, you cut off the things that those tissues need. Sometimes they end up even dying. And so sometimes you'll see these bed sores that even have holes in them when they get to be as bad as they can be because the tissue has just died and there hasn't been any intervention, So pressure would be number one. And then I guess the best way to describe number two would be friction. This would be kind of rubbing back and forth. As you get older, your skin is thinner. And so if you move in certain ways in a bed or a chair, maybe you can even work to thin that skin even more. So I say pressure combined with friction can make these worse for sure.
Yeah, before we go any further, I guess that the sheets or the mattress covers or something like that sometimes can help.
Yeah, I mean, you may have, they make, we used to sell these, we're having a hard time getting them right now, but we used to sell a product that would go on the back side of the ankles, or back side of the heel, excuse me. It was a wool, like a lambskin, a sheep, anyway, one of those animals, one of their skins, go on the back of the heels to keep it from rubbing against the sheets. So there are things like that out there that, you have to take, and we'll get that in just a second.
So where do these sores normally appear? What part of the body?
Got it. If you can, you picture somebody laying down and picture someone sitting down, you're going to hit several key areas. If it's people who are sitting, wheelchair, recliner, whatever, well, it's your tailbone and your butt. And just personally speaking, the absolute worst one I've ever put eyes on in my entire life, and I've seen several, was it was a tailbone that was just completely eaten up. your shoulder blades and spine. You don't think about that, but people that are sitting all day, that's going back too. So the shoulder blades are the touch points on the back of you. And then even in the backs of your arms and legs where they're resting on that chair, wheelchair, recliner, whatever. And then similar places if you're the bed-bound person, but you don't forget, you also add in at that point the back of your head and ears right here, because something like that is touching if you're bed-bound, but then still incorporating in shoulders, butt. And then the backs of your legs and heels all the way down are incorporated if you're in bed. So yeah, basically here on the back, all the way down to the bottoms of your feet, are susceptible.
Some of the descriptions that you guys have painted this morning, that's got to be very painful, and how do we kind of recognize these things?
Well, when you start to talk about recognizing them, first of all, it's very difficult for a person in this position to see these areas, right? So if you're confined to the bed, you can't examine your own tailbone, right? Or your back, or even the back of your head. Until they get to a certain place, and they have to get pretty bad, they don't necessarily even hurt that much. So it's very difficult for you to know. First of all, so let me say this. You're gonna have to have some help. It's as simple as that. To have somebody who can inspect your skin. If you're a person who is confined to the bed, if you're a person who's confined to a wheelchair, or you spend most of your day in a chair, you're gonna need some help. I know that's uncomfortable, but you're gonna have to have somebody close enough to you who can help examine your skin. Maybe it's a home health person, it's more of a healthcare professional. Otherwise, you need a real good friend, right? But when you talk about the warning signs, you're gonna have a patch. It's a change in color or a texture of your skin. There's gonna be some swelling. And when it gets worse, and some of you guys have seen this, there may be some draining and a pus-like substance that comes out of these type of wounds. And besides that, the skin itself just being tender.
Jake, it sounds like this can be a very serious situation for people. Before we get to that, is the being overweight, does that figure into the bed sores or anything like that?
You're gonna love this because you always pick on us when we say something about weight in here.
Yeah.
This one's the opposite.
Oh, wow.
Because one of the things that plays into this, you got that, like that layer of skin we're talking about here. You got the bed sheets or something under it.
Yeah.
Well, to make a lot of pressure, you got to have something right above that too, and it's bone. And so the less meat you got between that bed sheet and that bone, rubbing that skin from both sides, the safer you are.
So
from
some
this,
of them are safer than others, right?
So yeah, the more meat you got on that rump, the less likely you are to develop a bed sore, believe it or not.
And we chuckle a little bit, but this can be a very serious thing, can it?
Well, yes, it's, well, where does this go? Well, it's just a sore. Well, one, it's extremely painful. Two, if this was your knee, the front of your knee, and you needed to not rub something up against it for a few days, you'd be real careful with the front of your knee and not rub something up against it for a few days. Well, if you're bedbound and it's on your tailbone, you can't just get off of it. Right, you can't just get up and walk around. So they play out for long, long periods of time. Sometimes they never heal. Sometimes they're very difficult to heal. They can lead to all sorts of infections. The infection can just be in your skin layer. The infection can get into your bones, which I have seen. It can require all sorts of medical interventions. It can lead to all sorts of infections that travel the rest of your body as well. I mean, so wait a minute, it started out, a patch, smaller than a dime. Well, X number of weeks in, if you don't manage it, and I mean hardcore manage it, stay on top of it meticulously, it can get way out of hand.
I mean, we've got to lay down sometimes, but how can this be prevented?
Well, I'd say first of all, we need to take this seriously. And if you're a person who is not all that active, if you are confined to a bed, if you're confined to a chair, or you just choose to spend most or all of your time in a bed or a chair, we need to take it seriously. So first of all, if you're capable of moving and changing positions at least once an hour, that would be recommendation number one. If you can do that, change the position once an hour. If you need help to change positions, for example, if you're in a bed or one of your loved ones, we didn't talk about loved ones, we're talking to people. Maybe you're watching this show, one of your loved ones in this position. make sure you're helping them change positions if they can't do it themselves. A second one would be cushions. For example, if a person's in a wheelchair or you're sitting in a chair all day, you want to cushion that. But let me be clear about this. Not with a donut type cushion. You've seen these things, some of them are inflatable, some of them are just cushions that have holes in the middle. The problem is that now you have pressure on different areas that you don't want pressure on. So when you go to cushion your wheelchair or your regular chair, you want a cushion that covers the entire area, right? Keeping the skin clean and dry. That's as important as it can get. One of the things, I can't remember if you mentioned this or not, but one of the types of person who's more at risk for these type of sores is a person who's incontinent. So if you have a person who cannot control their urine or cannot control their feces, those things break down and damage the skin. And so those people are much more likely to get pressure ulcers. So keeping the skin clean and dry as possible, and then any way you can protect it. There are all kinds of barrier creams, ointments that you can put that really just make a thick layer over the skin that keep it from maybe the friction on the sheets or the chair or whatever it is you're sitting in. So Jake will talk some more about treatment in just a second, but the barrier ointments and creams can be an effective way of preventing as well.
And Jacob, it behooves children and grandchildren to kind of keep an eye on their parents and their grandparents as they age a little bit, because they may see something that their parents and grandparents don't see.
Yes, and this is probably off topic a little bit, but it's one that speaks to who we are, and that is, if you're that parent or that grandparent, do you really want to lower your pride enough to ask your kids and grandkids to do that? Hey, do that. They don't mind, I promise. I've been there. That's the first place I dealt with bed sores, was my granddad. We don't mind. Ask for help. But in terms of needing people and getting help, talking about the treatment of these things, it requires a slew of people. And that sounds weird, but it requires a physician to manage all this, to eyeball it, to treat it, to diagnose how bad it is. Sometimes it's physical therapists to get you
What
more.
type of doctor do you see for this?
Honestly, you start with a general doctor,
Okay.
but they often progress to where you're going to a wound care physician, which we have one in town here. You can end up with a wound care depending on how bad it is. You'll have sometimes, again, you need family members to help move you around. Sometimes you need a physical therapist to help get you more mobile so that you can do your own shifting. Sometimes you need an occupational therapist to help you with just what types of apparatuses and cushions and things there are. Sometimes it's a home health nurse. Sometimes it's hospice, depending on where you are in life at that point. This obviously isn't usually causing the hospice situation, but often they're the ones involved in this. I mean, sometimes there's a surgeon involved in this. Sometimes it's dietary. Sometimes it's people to help you with, hey, if we get your nutrition status fixed up a little bit, your skin will be healthier. Sometimes it's the person who's simply bringing in, better diapers or diagnosing more incontinence type care. There's so many people that can be and should be at certain points involved in this to help treat it. But he mentioned that making sure those skin barriers, those moisture barriers and ointments and pads and bandages, and it just requires help. You know what? Sometimes we just got to take our pride and put it down here. It requires help.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of these supplies are available at the store today.
Yeah, it's funny you should ask. Yes. Honestly, the truth is that you'll find more of these supplies in our pharmacy than in anywhere else in the pharmacy in town. And so we keep a lot of, not just wound care products, the ointments and barrier creams, but of course we keep the bandages and the tape and all those things that you'll need to go with it. And we have experience with this, so we know which kinds of tape you need to use and not use, for example. There are some that are just going to rip the skin to pieces, and others that'll be more gentle on it. So yeah, absolutely.
And before we go this morning, I want to touch on this again, because a lot of our folks watching this morning are aware of these skin sores or pressure ulcers, and if we don't get help, sometimes it can explode into something more seriously. So both you guys touched on it. Ask somebody. Get somebody involved in it.
Get somebody looking at it. I'll tell one last horror story. People, this is why we're not at the dinner table. If you're eating breakfast, put your fork down. I have seen one with these on peepers here. It was on a tailbone, on a back, that you could take your fist and put it in.
Oh, wow.
And get up to here and not touch anything.
Goodness.
Surgeons had been working on it for years. This didn't start yesterday. It had had multiple surgeries, and that was the best they could get it to. That was just a stable situation they could get it to. You could put your fist in it and not touch anything and pull it back out. They get worse. Again, that's the worst case scenario. I understand.
Yeah, wow.
But they can get every bit that bad.
Thank you guys for coming this morning. It's
Yes,
always
sir.
a pleasure to have you. Pressure ulcers, bed sores, whatever you want to call it. If you need more information, contact our friends at Marble City Pharmacy. That's a wrap for me here on Daybreak Live this morning. Going to be a